All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is such a fabulous special edition of the show today because if you can see, I have a physical guest sitting on a sofa with me. And for somebody who's only ever done virtual for the last 9 years, this is so exciting. So, Emily, tell us about who you are and what you're all about and why you're here.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And also, not a common thing for me to get to sit down with people in person. As somebody who's worked remotely for many years, it's a rare occurrence where you're like, oh my gosh, off screen, real life hugs. Like, this is wonderful. But yeah, so a little bit about me. I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas in the Midwest and spent most of my upbringing there. I moved up to Minnesota for graduate school. So I did my master's degree in urban and regional planning. Prior to that, I had studied environmental studies and Spanish and pretty much knew like I want to be working in the field of agriculture. And I also want to be helping shape the policy system in which farmers are working. And along the way, started to do a little bit of international travel and found that that was something that lit me up a lot, just being able to get out of my comfort zone, explore these different cultures, and really learn more about myself. And so as I was sort of, figuring out what does that look like for me, fast forward, I've just graduated with my master's degree in urban and regional planning. I focused on food systems as part of that, move out to West Central Minnesota and start working on this 5-acre CSA vegetable farm. And I was kind of in this like analysis paralysis mode, trying to figure out like what's next for me. At the time, I think I had applied for a job or like an internship in Singapore, and then there was a planning job that popped up in Hawaii because I was still very much interested in sort of this international travel bug that I had, and knew that I wanted to work kind of in the space of food and planning. And Singapore had been a place that had come up on my radar a lot for just the way that they have done some very cool stuff in terms of long range strategic planning. How is that reflected in terms of the physical planned environment that you see within this place? And I was like, oh, cool, it'd be, an amazing case study. And I was just all over the place in terms of just not really having clarity around what came next. And so what I did was, based on a lot of these things that I was listening to in the space of personal growth and development, they're like, basically, you just need to commit to something and trust that everything will fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I did. I was in love with the Lakes region, and it was the first time that I was immersed in this place where, even though I was in this rural part of the state, I felt like I had just uncovered this underground hippie scene in greater Minnesota. And I was connected to all these really cool farmers. And it was, of course, as a result of my supervisor, the farm that I was working with. This family was incredible, and they introduced me to these amazing people. And there was just this part of me that was like, stay. And just trust that things are going to work out. Like, this, of course, was summer 2020. So it was a very uncertain time for employment prospects, being a recent graduate, and just lots of opportunities drying up. And so I listened to that inner voice, and I stayed. And within like 2 months, basically towards the end of that growing season, I think this was around October of that year, a planning position popped up with this regional foundation and planning commission for a food systems planner, or actually a planner. I think it was like an assistant planning position. And this popped up as a result of the CARES Act. Essentially, these dollars were designed to help people within our region navigate sort of like, what does pandemic recovery look like? And how do you navigate these uncertain times in terms of economic development? And they put like everything under the sun in that job description. And so I could tailor it to what I wanted to do. And so I did that for about 1.5 years, and I built an amazing network of people across this 9-county region. I got to take on lots of things related to food systems planning as my career path. And I got to this point of just experiencing a really unhealthy workplace culture and burnout, and not feeling like I was being pushed in the way that I wanted to be. Like I was being stretched to my limits in terms of how many activities I could fit into a day and how many projects I could manage at a time. And I felt like I was being rewarded for that success. And what I really wanted to be doing was like, I wanted people to come back and be like, I'd love for us to work more strategically in this way, you know, or these other elements in terms of how I can do my job better, just being pushed to those greater limits. But instead, I found myself constantly hearing this like, oh my gosh, you're doing amazing things, you know, like I wish that I was, you know, that creative or, you know, thinking about these things in such an innovative way. And I recognize, having listened to a lot of podcasts about, you know, personal growth and development, but then also a lot of entrepreneurship related podcasts where I was hearing from, you know, these founders of startups that had scaled to like 1,000 employees within, you know, 12 months. Like, what were the ways that they were bringing people onto their team intentionally? And from day one, they had this really thoughtful onboarding process for their employees, and they talked about how they invested this level of intentionality into every person that they brought on the team. And just knowing that that existed, I was like, that's what I want. Like, those are the kinds of people that I want to work for, and I want to be pushed in a different way than I am currently. And those podcasts were honestly what motivated me to leave that position and like take this leap of faith that I could go out and do something on my own. And so it was sort of like towards the end, maybe I would say the last 6 months of that position, I had already been in conversation with a couple of other women in the region, one in particular who was this accountability buddy for me informally. Like, we met the first time and hit it off, and then we would check in regularly with each other and just be like, are you actually satisfied, you know, in the work that you're doing? And if not, like, what do you need to do differently? Because both of us were operating at a regional scale. We had like very little oversight or supervision in terms of people micromanaging what we had to do. We were self-starters, and we would just like get stuff done, you know, see a need and go do something to address it. And I think from that experience and sort of the relationship that we built over that time, she basically came to me and was like, I've decided I'm going to leave my position and I'm going to start a consultancy, because she's like, you know, I think I can make more money and do good work and work less, right? And just like have a healthier life for myself and my family. And she's like, what would it take for you to come work with me?
Wow.
And I was like, holy shit. Like, that doesn't happen every day, you know? And to know that somebody else saw that kind of potential in me, it was a big deal. And I was frank with her. I was like, a contract, honestly, because I had had this idea in the back of my head of like, okay, I want to start a farm of my own at some point. And I also recognize that most of the farmers I know are getting more than 50% of their income from an off-farm job, whether that's to support health insurance, you know, kind of benefits or whatever that is, that they're not able to afford or generate enough money for themselves to be able to purchase that on their own as a business. And so that had been in the back of my head for a long time. And I also knew, kind of dabbling in the space of personal growth and development and kind of mental health and well-being, and having at that point been immersed in Minnesota's like regional and statewide food systems, I recognized that there was not a single entity that was really focused like narrowly on that particular topic to be able to help farmers. There was all kinds of stuff to help with, you know, like doing a business plan, or maybe there's like on-farm training where you do an apprenticeship, or, you know, different workshops related to soil health. Or if you wanted to sell at the farmer's market, you could go to a training for that. But most of the mental health and well-being resources were all around like, here's the suicide hotline, right? And like, and to me, that was just like not the kind of solution that I felt would be setting farmers up for success.
Right.
And I knew that my deepest kind of mission and core goal in starting my own business, if I wasn't going to be farming myself, would be to increase access to land and capital for people who wanted to start their first farm. And within that, this niche of, you know, like minority farmers, if you're, you know, an ethnic minority or a veteran or, you know, a tribal member or a woman, right? Like, if you didn't feel like you could easily see yourself in these other maybe, quote, traditional farmers that were out there, like I wanted to be able to create a community for those people. Firstly, because I identify as that, right? And I wanted to create the community that I was looking for. But then secondly, there are just so many structural barriers for these farmers, whether it's, culturally, of the discrimination that you're going to experience, or structurally in the way that these policies are set up and built, and when their deadlines fall, during the middle of the harvest season. And then these, folks from the state agencies ask themselves, like, why aren't we, having our funds all used up? And so I wanted to be able to provide resources for people in that arena of like bringing this practical piece into this policy space as sort of a long-term systems change kind of thing. But then I also recognize that farmers aren't going to wait 30 years for the federal policy change to do what they do.
Right.
And they need an immediate solution and something that they can put into practice in their life tomorrow. And that was always in my mind, like, how can I be of greatest service to these farmers that I want to help? And that was the particular piece that really motivated me to start a podcast, which I did back in 2021, and then started publishing episodes in 2022. It's called The Transcendent Farmer. And so it's really just this platform for me to talk about these, things related to mental health and well-being and holistic business development. Because for me, the trajectory that I took in my own entrepreneurial journey was inspired and motivated by these other podcasts that I was listening to. And I was like, why can't I do that for the farming community? And if I'm not seeing this kind of particular resource out there, like, why can't it be me?
Right. And I think that's the biggest piece, right? When you think about the missing pieces to what you were doing, was exactly how you fill that gap. And that was really the big thing for you. And, I love that the podcasts were what inspired you to create your own podcast, and niching down or niching down, whatever you want to say, the right terminology is massive for you. And that was really what brought you to even where you are today, which is kind of how you and I met. Mm-hmm. And, for those of you who are seeing us live sitting on a sofa together, we're both in San Miguel in Mexico. And we met at a networking group. And, it was everybody comes together and it's, a great networking group. And you made a comment about something that's kind of like my trigger word where I'm like, ooh, I need to talk to you. So, tell me a little bit about how that came about when it came to using, because, again, remember, I don't know anything other than what you and I have talked about. When I think farming, when I think that kind of stuff, I'm not thinking technology and computers and any of that stuff. So how did you kind of bring that passion of AI and how you use that into your world with farmers? And I can only imagine it blew people's minds, because I see it every day in regular businesses, but then take a farmer or somebody who not necessarily knows all about the technology. But how did that kind of come about?
Yeah. So let's see. Fast forward to having started my own business, basically doing food systems consulting work. Around the time, I would say maybe a year or a year and a half into that work, that was kind of when I first got exposed to ChatGPT. And it was a very interesting moment for me, because I had already been observing a lot in terms of what are the bottlenecks in getting access to resources for these farmers. And it wasn't what most people thought. Like, it was actually grant writing skills was what was keeping these farmers from getting access to financial capital that they could invest in their farm. And whether it was a grant writing skill or it was a loan application, so many of these governmental forms were just inaccessible to people because they use this lingo that it seems like a foreign language. And then because there are oftentimes the people that are writing these applications, it's such an academic language. It's also not accessible for that reason. And so I had found over the years that my basically skills of having funded my education, like 7 years of college, by writing scholarship essays, that skill translated very well to writing grant applications. It was the same thing where you would essentially, recycle words from what they were looking for in terms of the actual language. You make sure that there's alignment between the funding rubric and what you're talking about. And, as long as you have a solid idea and can communicate clearly, like, why is this investment a good one to make, and what is the ROI that you can expect from that. That's all it is, right? In plain, simple terms.
Right.
When it comes to the actual writing process, that's a whole other beast, because then you have to come up with your own logic model of understanding, okay, the input leads to this output, and this is the long-term impact. Like, it gets way more complicated than it needs to be. And so when I pitched to my supervisors on a consulting project that I was working on in particular, I immediately saw the potential of this technology as I started playing around with it to essentially speed up the process with which I could write what I would think would be a winning grant application.
Right.
So I pitched this concept to my supervisors, and I said, hey, I think that there's a lot of people that can benefit from this knowledge. I would like to take a real world application and apply for it on behalf of our West Central Food Council and record the entire thing in real time and publish it to YouTube. And I got permission from my team to do this. And we got the application. The money was funded, the project was funded. And that was, I think, $70,000, and it was like a 50% match, which we had to be very creative about that. For anybody that is familiar with that or not, match essentially means that you are creating some kind of a contribution, whether it is through volunteer time or actual cash, that you say, okay, for this much grant money, I'm going to put up, the same amount and 50% to be able to pay my staff or to fund some other part of the project. So we just wrapped up that project at the end of June. And essentially, I took something that would ordinarily probably take me about 30 hours to do, and I reduced that to 12 hours of time.
Wow.
Which, that's what I think the potential, that motivated me to then essentially pilot this 3-day challenge earlier this last year. So basically, at a time when everybody was looking at, okay, the administration is freaking out, they're like cutting all of this funding, and we don't know what we can rely on anymore. I immediately recognized, like, we need to act fast and we need to help these farmers find funding. And I know how I can do that for them.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And it's so interesting because you took something that you had already started playing with. And this is the argument I get into with a lot of people all the time. Like, you're not an expert in ChatGPT. I mean, level 5 dropped yesterday, so nobody's an expert in anything. At the time of this recording, it just dropped. So it's like, but you didn't have to be. You just had to figure out how it could help you within your area.
Yes.
And so you finished it up, you did the grant, you did it all live, and you got the application.
Yes.
So I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And now you're basically trying to teach other people how to do the same thing.
Exactly.
30 hours to 14 from a business perspective, from a time-saving, financial saving business perspective, is phenomenal in terms of money.
Yeah.
Numbers.
And here's another example. For an application that I wrote last month, it took me an hour and 20 minutes to write this application. And we just found out on Monday that we got it $15,000 for an hour and 20 minutes of my time.
You do the math on that. That's pretty awesome.
That is an insane hourly rate.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I think that is what motivates me to want to continue to figure out, like, how can I continue to validate this in the market, like beta test with people, and just continuously show folks the results. Because and it just makes me laugh, because there's so many people out there that it's like, I don't really know what ChatGPT is, right? Or they kind of like dabble, or they're like, they recognize that they should be using this, but there's just like this huge cloud or like a curtain in between where they're at and them actually starting to use the technology. I just presented to, it was a group of folks working on this like meat processing bottleneck in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago. And that was the response where, I said, don't worry, like, I've got a whole YouTube playlist that lays it out, step by step. Like, I want to help demystify these things because there's an insane amount of potential to help farmers, right? Take the reins of the situation. Like, go find your funding in literally 60 seconds.
Right.
And then write your application in a couple of hours. I feel like that excuse of time and understanding where the money is at, it is no longer.
It's gone.
When we have this technology, it's just not a question anymore.
And you think about when it comes to a business perspective, where it is, how does it work, how much money it costs, those kind of objections are gone, and your results speak for themselves. You can turn around and say, an hour and a half, 15K, 15 hours, 70K. Like there's no arguing that. And so I think that's the beautiful thing about this. And one of the things I love is showcasing people using AI in a completely different way than what we may have been seen to see, right? People see it outside and they're like, oh, I got to write my blog, or I got to put content out. And so I love showcasing the unique side of AI. And, again, if I said to somebody, okay, we got farmers and we got grants, and people would first be like, okay, great. And then we got ChatGPT, and they would be like, I don't see it. And it's like, this is how you can save time, save money, and get money for these people that are just, like I said, the results speak for themselves. So one of the things, of course, I love to do on the show is demonstrate your zone of genius. So for those of people who are watching being like, well, this is weird, how are you going to do that when you guys are sitting side by side on a sofa? Don't worry, don't panic, we've got this sorted. So we wanted to bring this part together first, because first of all, how cool is it that we're in the same place? But we're also going to take a spot where Emily's on her computer, I'm on my computer, just like we would normally do in any of my virtual shows, and she's going to demonstrate exactly what we're talking about. So can you just, again, I don't want to take it away, we want to see what it is, but can you just give it a little bit of what we're expected to see in the next few minutes when I ship over to the other side of our virtual world? What are you going to show us?
Absolutely. So I came up with a few ideas for things that I wanted to demo with you.
Okay.
One of them is where I typically start a 3-day challenge of just generating a list of funding sources based on your current context. So we'll basically break down what a good prompt would look like for that, so that you can get the kind of results that you want to. And then another one would be just starting to flesh out content for an actual grant application. So we'll pick something in real time.
Yes.
And then we'll basically look at how would you start to address that. And then I think another thing that I want to share is, how do you leverage some of your existing assets? Like, for example, if you already have a website or a Facebook page for your business, how do you leverage that information to then flesh out more content for yourself so that you don't have to keep rewriting the same thing?
Right. And I love that. And anybody who's watching or listening to this and you're like, yeah, but I'm not a farmer, I don't need grants, you're missing the point here. Because the thing is, we're taking practical steps that businesses need to do anyways, right? I mean, whether you're an entrepreneur and there's grants that you can get in your city or town, whether you are a business that you're trying to find a way to get into the market somehow, this is what we're talking about. We're taking AI, we're taking ChatGPT, and we're creating opportunity. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to not closing your brain down to watching this and being like, well, Emily's talking about farming and I don't know anything about farming. Neither do I, guys. I don't know anything about farming. I've learned more in this last 20 minutes and our conversations before. But that's not what we're talking about. We're actually talking about taking the concept and putting it pretty much anywhere. And I think that's going to be the most beautiful thing that we're going to come into this. And then if you're a farmer and you are in this situation, obviously reach out, because Emily has some amazing things to share with you. But if you're not, there's so much to learn from this episode as well. And I can't wait to share the hands-on piece, because let's be honest, you can sit and you can watch us talk and you can be excited that we're sitting on the sofa together and actually can touch each other if we wanted to. But seeing it in action, that is what is the beauty here, is that you're going to be able to see in action what she's talking about. And then, as I said, open-minded and think, how can I use this for my business? And a little quick tip on that, watch our video, put it in Perplexity, and ask, this is my business. How could I use this concept in my own business? We use AI to help us with so many parts of building, growing, and changing, that this is just another opportunity for that.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Well, anyways, we are going to end the in-person part of this. And I just, first of all, want to say thank you. We found this beautiful studio here in San Miguel that we were sitting on a sofa doing. We have a lovely, lovely gentleman helping us out here. Yeah. And we are doing this. It's the first time for me, I know, and I'm super pumped about it. But stay tuned for the actual virtual side of this, where you are going to see the in-process, how Emily breaks it down and shows you, and just come in with an open mind and we'll get right to it.
Awesome.
All right, let's do it. All right, so welcome back. If you have not watched the first part of this, definitely take a look because Emily and I are now back. We're actually in different countries at this point. Emily's back in the US and I'm in Mexico still, even though the last one we were together, because I really wanted to bring her on behind the scenes in her computer station. So, Emily, can you give us a little bit of a kind of high level of what you're about to show us? And then you're going to share your screen and kind of give us a deep dive into how you use AI within your world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, great to be here in virtual space again. Greetings from the tiny town of Pelican Rapids, Minnesota, population 2,500. For folks that are listening that are familiar with it. And yeah, what we're going to do is get into the meat and bones of what it means to identify funding sources that may be available for you if you are a farmer or just a small business. And then we'll talk about a little bit, probably before I even share the screen, of just what makes a great prompt. So ChatGPT is my primary tool that I'm using for that. And then I'm going to do a quick demo of how to find those funding sources. And then from a funding source that you actually want to apply for, how you would shorten the time to be able to write an application, basically start generating content to write an application. And then I want to touch a little bit on navigating these screening tools that are popping up. So basically the folks that put out funding sources, they are now putting these applications through a digital tool that then flags if you've been using AI to write your application. So this is a new phenomenon and something that I think is natural that would come up in this kind of a sort of, I don't know, industry. And I think that it's important that people are aware that they have resources and tools that are available to them.
Yeah, I love that. And for those of you guys who are listening who may still be, and I said this in kind of our intro one before, sitting here being like, well, what does that have to do with me? I want you to watch and listen from a bigger lens, right? So we're looking here for what Emily does and what her focus is. But if you start looking at it from a bigger lens and thinking, what do I do? And how could this help me? And maybe I'm not writing grants or focusing on that, but how could AI really help me in what I love, my industry, my sister's best friends, girlfriends, whatever. Like, how do we help ourselves as human beings in different industries with AI? So look at it from a bigger lens and get excited, even if what we're talking about specifically doesn't affect you in the same way. So, all right. So take it away, Emily. Let's go.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about a couple of things that make a great prompt to start with. The reason is that not a lot, like if you don't have a strong foundation, you aren't going to be able to go very far with some of this, or you're going to start getting results and information that's not very helpful. So when I'm working with people specifically, I want to feed in as much information as possible to tell the story of context to get the best kind of information. And you're basically training this tool to get the most effective data, resources, stuff that's timely. And so the thing that I recommend when folks starting out, maybe just draft this somewhere, whether it's in digital space or write it down. What is your timeline? So how fast are you looking to put things into place in terms of this grant funding or funding of any kind, really, to support this thing that you're working on? Then you want to get specific about how much you need, how much are you asking for, because that is going to also really narrow down your results of, are you going to look at something that's local, maybe that it's like a $15,000 fund, or are you looking at federal dollars? We're talking a multi-million-dollar project that you're looking to get funded. That is a big range. So how much you're asking for is important. Then understanding, who's on your team and what are their strengths. So if you have any existing information like a resume, a CV, even strengths test results, I recommend having those on hand. And then understanding, like, what's your mission? Do you have that typed out, written somewhere that you can just copy, paste? And then having other things that are on hand. Again, this is going to help craft your prompt, would be background files that help provide context about what you do. So if you've previously written a grant application, if you've created a business plan before, if you have a marketing strategy, even if you have the URLs of your existing Facebook page, your existing website,
have those on hand as you go into this process, and it's going to make it really fun. You're going to be able to like use your creative license with some of this stuff. And I really do feel like you are only limited by your imagination. Another pro tip before we get into the actual software is always asking, what clarification questions do you have at the end of your prompt? And I guarantee you it's gonna like zero in into stuff that you never even would have thought of.
Yeah, I love this so much because, as I said, if you're looking at it from a wider scope, this is exactly what we talk about in prompting for everything. I mean, I do AI imaging, and the more specific you are with your prompting, the more specific images you get. Vague images equal vague, vague prompting equals vague images. It's the same with any type of prompting, right? If you have all of these bits that you can pull in, whether it's a PDF or information, like you say, your CV, all of that stuff, it's going to get very specific to you. And before anybody sits there and says, oh, well, that's a lot of work, try writing a grant application without that. I'm going to guess, and I haven't done one. I did one when I was not grant, but like a scholarship application years ago when I was in university. And it probably took me like 3.5 weeks. So if you're like, it's a lot of work, no, it's not. What's a lot of work is not using it this way. That's a lot of work. So let's dive in. Okay. So Emily, so you've got all of this stuff collected and ready to go. I'm assuming you're going to kind of show us what that looks like as you get into the prompting in ChatGPT.
Yes. So my request is sent.
And there we go. Yep. Presenters can share now.
Beautiful. Okay. So I'm going to share with you a demo of what I've done as an illustration with folks in the past. So when I go through this 3-day farm funding challenge, the day 2 is focused on, okay, we're going to introduce ChatGPT into what would ordinarily be a standard process for trying to find funding opportunities. Now, there's a lot of folks out there that recognize that if you search within Google your state name plus farm funding or farm grants, you're generally going to pull up some kind of an agency website that has a database. And then within that database, you can search through, what funding opportunities are available for farmers right now. And then they will all have their own specific priority and niche. This one's for dairy producers, this one's for beef people, this one's for the folks that are doing biofuel, right? And so what makes it hard and what stops people from moving forward is the overwhelm from just getting into that database. And they're like, I don't even know what keyword to use to find the resource that I'm, eligible for. So here's what I threw in, basically using a real world example of some folks that I was connected to through another kind of consulting contract. So what we have, you are working to identify funding opportunities to help a farmer expand their bison operation by improving fencing and water access on the farm. This farmer is located in Minnesota, so already we have geography, right? We're limiting scope in that way, and has $25,000 worth of cash that they can contribute to the improvements, but they anticipate it will take at least $500,000. So now we've also clarified what cash do they have on hand? Like, what do they have to contribute? The reason is that a lot of times funding opportunities will require some kind of a match, whether it's a cash match, whether it's sweat equity, but they want to show that you have skin in the game. So being able to provide that context as part of this picture is important. You're also clarifying what is the full amount that you're needing. You're estimating above $500,000 essentially. And then this also is important. We specify that this is a bison operation, and we said specifically, what is it that they are looking for on the farm? So then what we're doing is leveraging our existing assets and kind of playing with it. So I wrote, can you identify which of the funding opportunities from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture they may be eligible for that have a deadline in the next 6 months? So I'm now narrowing it even further. This isn't looking nationally what opportunities, but specifically within my state, within this agency. And then I'm also giving myself a deadline within the next 6 months. And what I've done in here is added the URL of that particular web page. So now I'm basically crawling all of the information that's on there as a reference. So please use this funding page as a resource. And then I followed that with, can you also generate a list of key search terms for this project that will help them filter through funding search engines on other web pages? So this is helping make it even more expansive so that you can apply this to other contexts. And then, like I said, end with this question. Please let me know what clarification questions you may have to filter through the options. So based on this fictitious farmer, we essentially have, as we scroll down, it looks like there's 3 different funding opportunities at the time that this was put in. There's the Agri-Livestock Investment Grant. It will give you a brief description of what it is. And then as you put your cursor over these different links, it's highlighted specifically where they're getting that information from. This was not a feature before, and now that they've added it in, everyone I think is so grateful for that, because citing content was a really big question. And specifically for this, you want to track down as fast as possible, where do I go for this information? So when I click on this, essentially what it's opening is the RFP, which stands for Request for Proposals. And then it'll have the deadline, but this is all of the information about this particular funding opportunity. So then you can scroll through and figure out, okay, what sounds like a good fit for me? And I'll talk a little bit about how you can also do that as well. And then after that, this one's like, okay, this is a loan program. It's not a grant, but it could be something that you're eligible for. So you may learn about things that you never even put on the list, like, oh, maybe it's not a grant. Maybe it's actually a startup fund that's specifically for supporting farm and food businesses, right? So there's lots of things here. And then essentially what you're doing is you're taking this list, and then you can go put it into another website where you've got just this search box within funding opportunities. This may also generate some ideas to talk about what you do in ways that you never would, but the government would. And that's a really big part of this. It's so hard for people to wrap their heads around. And I think why I've been better than average at grant writing is because I understand that the words that farmers are using are not the words that the government agencies are using. They have to talk about things in a different way in order to get funding from the federal government that they can then re-grant to these farmers. And so then what they often do is they'll write their applications using the same language. But that's where a big disconnect comes from, because these farmers, we just want plain language, right? And so that's where this would be my recommendation. If you see that this is a 20-page document and you're like, wow, this is really overwhelming, I'm going to go ahead and save this to my downloads. This is just a quick trick that anybody can do. And then you could basically say, please summarize the attached RFP in plain language in, I'm going to say 2 paragraphs. So you can set whatever parameters you want to. Then I'm just clicking on that document. I'm attaching it to this particular thread. It's uploading currently. You'll see that it gets a little bar here. And then once this is done, this is going to scroll down past a bunch of other text that I've put in. So we'll see where it goes. But this is a kind of where it's like, farmers need this.
Yes. Well, and this too, just so anybody watching who happens to not farm and fall in the farming industry, this is amazing for so many different ways, right? You can download, I know a lot of people use LinkedIn. You can download somebody's profile in LinkedIn, put it into a ChatGPT, and then actually bring another one in and say, I want to connect these 2 people. How? And let me find something in common. So it downloads the 2 of them, puts it in. So this actual tip right here is so amazing in so many different ways when it comes to ChatGPT. But in this case, I could totally understand, because you're looking at 20 pages and you're also looking at the language they're using and kind of scratching your head. And now that you've asked it to do in plain language, I often say like I'm a 5-year-old, because I'm like, I need like really, really easy to understand 2 paragraphs, 20 pages down to 2 paragraphs. And now you can read this and be like, oh, okay, now I understand.
Exactly. And then if you want to do any other kind of query about an existing document, I just can't, it's that the things are endless that you can do and say, does this require matching? You know, how much? Is it cash? Of what kind? And you can basically have a conversation with a document that doesn't require you to read the whole thing. and you save so much time. I remember one of the funding sources I was looking at for my business, I asked it to put on a scale of 1 to 10, how competitive do you think I would be in order to apply for this on a scale of 1 to 10, based on everything that you know about my business, right? That can also help just like weed through stuff very quickly, move on to the next thing. Because I think that that's where a lot of business owners and farmers especially, right? We're time limited. And we don't want to waste our time trying to just read through these things. That's one of the biggest pieces that I hear from people, is why they don't go forward with it. And they're like, oh, it's just the administrative burden is so high. I'm going
Right.
to.
Well, we also get, we also get very like, I call it analysis paralysis, right? You're in a space where there's so much information. You're like, I don't even know where to start. I don't know what to look at. I don't know what to do. And you're basically solving this problem by 2 paragraphs. And you could pull in multiple documents into this space in the same chat and get, 30 documents times 20 pages at 2 paragraphs in plain language. And all of a sudden that, that thought in our head, I don't have the time, or the administration, is solved right here. Super done.
Exactly. Yes. I feel that there's such a liberatory feeling in using this technology, whereas I will admit, I hated grant writing before ChatGPT came along. It was the top on my list of things I never want to do again, even though it pays well and I'm good at it.
Right.
Right.
But
And
now,
yes. And now we're like, oh gosh, it's hard to imagine not doing this because it's so much fun. And I think that, that is never a word I thought I would throw around in the same sentence as grant writing.
Understandably, but yes, you bring it together, make it easier, make it easy to understand. And I mean, I think when we were talking earlier in the segment, you were saying like the amount of money that you can get from grants doing this is, from small to very, very large. And when you think about how that can help yourself, your business, the farming industry, the different areas. I mean, as I said, going back to scholarships, like my daughter just graduated and we've gone through this a little bit with scholarships. It's like, it saves so much time. It saves and I mean, you could say fun. I would maybe not say fun. I say fun like when I give somebody a workout and I'm like, it was so fun. And they're like, speak for yourself. But it's that tool to be able to support us. And, I think it's really important to remember that it is a tool, and that doesn't mean it's perfect. And AI still has, areas where you have to still go through it and double check it. And that's the beauty of still being humanized, right? We still, as humans, need to check things and double check our T's and dot our I's. But it saves so much time. And in this case, potentially can make a ton of money from a grant that is given to you by using these tactics.
Exactly. Yes. So a quick example of how you can query a document. This was something I did just earlier today. So this is not something that's pre-scripted, right? This is like real time. How is Emily using this to help find funding and identify best fit? So I work as a project coordinator for our West Central Food Council, which is a food policy council. We oversee a 4-county region. My goal as being a project manager is to identify opportunities for funding for this particular group that's mostly volunteer based, and then there's a project team that is paid. This particular funding document that was created summarized over the last 3 years, I believe, all of the federal funding that had gone to support food policy councils across the entire United States. This was put on by the Center for Livable Futures, I believe, like Johns Hopkins. And what I wanted to do was play with this and say, if somebody's already done the research on all of these food policy councils and how they've been funded, I want to know what's still active, because this was created in light of all the administration's basically funding going away for this stuff. And based on all of the content that I've already put in here regarding the West Central Food Council, what's going to be the best fit? So then I also put a timeline as per, these best practices within the next 3 to 6 months, because we want to get money fast, right? So then I asked, please provide a brief overview of the funding, why it's a good fit, and then rank them in terms of best fit with a score of 10 being highest and 1 being lowest. I haven't even looked at the results from this. So we're going to look at it together. So this is saying, based on the document that you shared, here are the funding sources that are still active and relevant for the West Central Food Council within the next 3-6 months. One thing I could have done is put the URL for our website in parentheses after West Central Food Council, which is a common thing that I do. Because I've already done that for this particular project, I didn't spend the time doing that. But it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, holy cow. There's 6 funding sources that are still active, and it's giving a fit with the
Oh,
basic
10 out of 10.
one.
Love
Not
it.
bad, right? So now I have information of not only what I'm eligible for, but what's going to be the best fit based on the priorities of this funding source. So now I can take this information and say, okay, let's talk more about the local food promotion program. I want to send a 1-pager to my supervisors that talks about this funding source, why I think we should go after it, and it's worth, writing a grant for. And then I generate the 1-pager, I generate email content that then goes to my supervisors, and then I ask for a green light, right? And how much time have I wasted? 5 minutes?
Right. Which, I mean, so give us an idea of something like this. Would that have taken you a day, 5 days, 2 hours? Like we're talking a massive savings, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, just to review this document, I mean, I think this is a 36-page document,
Wow.
right? This is significant. So it definitely would have taken at least an hour or 2 hours just to review all of the content. And then I would have to decide what's the best fit based on what I know about the group. And then I would, draft that email. Probably we're looking at like maybe 2.5 hours to get to just this
right
point.
here. Yes. Well, and I think that's the beautiful thing, right? People who have issues with AI, and again, not our people, we know this, but when they talk about, AI is replacing humans, et cetera, no, because you still have your expertise. You still have the information, and then I'm looking at this being like, okay, federal funding. Okay. I don't know, because that is me as a human being. So you have the help. It's a critical thinker. It's a time saver. Why would we do something that would take us 2 hours just to read the PDF when we can bring it all together in this beautiful space, and to look at a fit score of 10 out of 10 for, number one, the local food promotion program, and spend time there versus bringing one up that might be a 2 out of 10. There's no point in spending time there. And so it really does change the game in so many ways. But as a human being, you, Emily, still need to be a part of this, because you have to now take this to that next level. And I think that's really where people get it so wrong, is that you still have to do part of that place. I can't jump in right now and be like, oh, perfect, because I know nothing about food promotion. I know nothing about your business. So it's beautiful to help with the critical thinking and the time saving, but you as a human being still need to be a part of this process. And I think that's what we try to get across when it comes to AI being, that thinking partner versus the replacement of Emily in your business. Never going to happen, but it helps save time, helps with thought process, all of those things.
Exactly. Yes. So, okay, let's take, for example, one of the funding sources that recently came through. I believe this is the one that took like an hour and 20 minutes to draft. And normally, like this would take a lot longer.
Right.
But again, it's by putting in the strategic information from the beginning that you can do that. So what I have done is there's 2 things. There's an updated budget. This was I think I can click on this. So this is an overview of what I want to be doing with some funding. Is this the right one? No, actually, it's the Better Food Policy Fund. Let's look at this one. Yes. Okay. So what I did was I wrote the application. It was very simple. This was probably just like 2 or 3 questions. So this one we had identified was really easy to apply for. But then what I did, again, this is this piece of when you are in this stage of first starting to use this tool and you're like, oh, I still want my voice to be there. I don't want this technology to take things over. Ask for feedback on how you can strengthen your application. That's exactly what I did here. I wrote, I'd love to get some feedback on our draft to strengthen what we've got and see if anything else we can adjust to make sure that it's addressing the funding priorities adequately. That's what all grant writers will tell you, like, come back to the RFP, make sure that it's there. So what I did was I put in a URL for the funding organization, and I use that as additional context of, okay, these are the people that we are writing to. And I specifically link to their mission and values page, right? So
Oh,
there's
so smart. So
strategy.
smart.
There's a lot of strategy going in here. And then basically organized by section, it gave feedback on, okay, what's working? What are some suggestions that you could strengthen this? And then even gives you down to this particular sentence is how I would change it in order to fix this particular part or make it stronger, right? And then there's another
Wow.
section. It does the same thing. This was incredibly insightful because it reminded me of what the values were of the organization and how those needed to be reflected in what we were writing. So it goes through the end,
Wow.
and then basically it'll ask, do you want help integrating this? And then I asked to keep going into this process. So I revised section by, the second section. And then I was asking, can you help reduce this to 250 words? A lot of people also struggle with this. This is the other part of, like, why does grant writing take so long? Because you have character counts and word limits. And
Right.
people, if you like to tell a good story, grant writing is not your place to do it. Talk about
Short, smart, but that's the beautiful thing is, like you said, if you have limits of characters, you can say, write this in 250 characters or 250 words and bring it to me, where if it was just us doing it, we'd be like counting and working, and it's a lot more challenging for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's what I've got for kind of just like overview demo stuff. I just wanted to wrap up by sharing a couple of thoughts around this piece of navigating screening tools, right? So if someone is feeding something into a screening tool and they're trying to figure out, like, how do I get around that? How do I still use these tools and have it be okay? Some of the best practices around this are using local data and statistics, right? Like, that's not anything that can be copied, and that's going to be unique. If you have testimonials from people that you have served before, previous clients, put that into your story, because again, that's never going to be something that ChatGPT is pulling from. That's a personal connection that you have, someone that you've served. This other piece of, like, adding emotional tone and cultural specificity. So a lot of what people recognize very quickly in AI writing is that it's very generic. And when you start to add that, like, flavor into it, voice, right? What makes great writing great, that's gonna also distinguish what you are writing from these bots, right? And what they're gonna spit out. And then the other piece that you can use in order to screen your own content, there's a few tools out there. So we'll probably throw this in your show notes, but GPT-0 is one. There's writer.com. They have an AI content detector. Then there's this, like, sections about if you're looking at, like, AI in philanthropy. There's this article called Charting a Responsible Course, and I'll share that so that folks have it as a reference as well. But this is a big opportunity, and I think that more people need to know about this. I'm really, really excited to share this with folks and just get it out into the world.
Yeah, I love it so much. I love it so much because, everything you just said, even at the end there, where it's, emotional and connected and all of that stuff, and for those who don't know, you can personalize your ChatGPT to sound more like you once you've started adding things, obviously in Emily's case, in my case, anybody that uses it quite regularly, there's a lot to learn. And one of my favorite tips is to do voice notes and conversations within ChatGPT, because not only that does it pick up the words you say, the the ahs, those type of things. It then creates, an output that is more like you than it is like a robot or like a generic kind of thing. And so again, when you're doing everything, whether it is grant writing or content writing or writing for a blog or writing an essay, having those emotional connections, having those stories, having those testimonials, because in the end, AI is still taking from other places, right? Taking from the web, taking from whatever. And then it's very generic. And anybody who's seen social media content or anybody who has read anything where you're like, oh my gosh, that's totally ChatGPT, is because they haven't taken some of those things. They haven't looked at the emotional connection. They haven't looked at the story, and they probably are personalizing their ChatGPT and making it customized and stuff like that. So always remember that in the end, they want your voice to come through. And whether you're saving time or having a critical thinking partner with ChatGPT to do grants or projects or whatever, always include your voice to that. So I often say I swear a lot normally. This is this is actually a normal conversation, but those are the things that come through. So if I am talking people are going to be like, is that really her, because she really swears a lot, right? So it's all of those things that become you in your writing. And obviously in grant writing, you're not going to have that kind of personality put out in there, but it is definitely known that if you're using a robot and you sound like a robot, it's going to be detected. And I truly believe that this kind of detection and this kind of legislation is going to come more and more as AI becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But it's nice to know that there's ways to kind of work through that right now, where it's like, I can use this information, I can add some emotion, I can add testimonials, I can add my character, and it's still going to sound like me in a grant and, in an application, in a scholarship application or whatever it may be. So I absolutely love that. I'm so glad that you came on and demonstrated with us, because I'm with you. Like, I believe everybody needs to know how AI can support them in whatever they're doing. So whether it's application, grants, whether it's business, whether it's, whatever it is. So thank you so much for sharing with us. Now, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, my sister's best friend needs to know about Emily, I need to connect her, I need to make sure that they get there, where can they find you and your information?
Absolutely. Yeah. So online, it's Mezclada, MEZCLDA.co. That's a website. Same name at Mezclada.co. Also on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook. And yeah, send me an email too, because I respond really well to that. And if you want to set up a time to chat, work through these things together, I would love to do that. It's Emily at MEZCLADA.co.
Perfect. Well, and anybody who's watching, all of those connections, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of that will be down in the show notes. So if you are like, what in the heck, you can just go click on that. It will take you right there. But definitely reach out. Definitely share this with anybody who might be in a situation where grant writing, whether it's farming industry, it doesn't even matter. Emily can surely help with that. And then anybody who is in a situation where, as I said, you're kind of looking from a higher lens, right? Is it real estate? Is it, mortgaging? Is it like whatever it can be? How is what Emily just took us through and how we've talked about AI, how could that support you in what you're doing? And if you're ever wondering, reach out to me, reach out to Emily. We're here. We have conversations about AI and how it can help. And obviously we're in two very different industries, but we know the support that AI can help bring to the table, and we want to share that with other people. So if you're not quite sure, you're watching this, you're excited, but you're not really sure how it helps, reach out to one of us, because I'm sure we can give you some support and some ideas on how that can help as well.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for having the time, even in little small ville that you're in the US. And don't worry, guys, she's coming back to Mexico. She just happens to be there for a few days. So you never know, you may see another episode with us together in Mexico. But until then, have yourself a fantastic one, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Thanks, Emily.